The rain tapped gently against the cracked windows of the old house. The kind of steady rhythm that once made me feel safe when I was little, curled up with a book under the weight of warm blankets. But that night, the sound only made everything heavier. I sat on the edge of the same couch I'd grown up on, the fabric worn thin under my fingertips, my body trembling from something far colder than the weather across from me. My brother Caleb stood in the fading light of the living room, his hands buried deep in the pockets of his old coat, his face drawn tighter than I'd ever seen it. His voice cracked when he said it. "Lena, you have to do this for us," but his eyes didn't waver. They locked onto mine like he was afraid I'd disappear if he blinked. We had been each other's everything after our parents died in a car crash when I was 16. Caleb was 20 then, practically still a kid himself, but he stepped up without hesitation. He dropped out of college, worked jobs that paid too little and took too much, and made sure I never went to sleep hungry. He was my protector, my hero, my only family left. I never questioned the way he handled our money, our home, our life. I trusted him like I trusted the ground beneath my feet until that moment. "I messed up," he said, dragging a hand through his hair, his voice tight with guilt. "The debts, they're drowning us. I tried to fix it. Lena, I swear I did, but this man, this offer, he's the only way out." I blinked, numb. "What are you talking about?" He hesitated. "Dominic Vale," he said like the name tasted like metal on his tongue. "He's a businessman, a millionaire. He knows people. He can wipe our debt clean, every penny. But there's one condition." My heart sank. "What condition?" He swallowed, avoiding my eyes now. "You marry him." The room tilted. The words felt like they were meant for someone else. Marry a stranger? Be sold off like some porcelain antique to settle a balance sheet? "You want me to marry a man I've never even met?" I whispered. "For money." "It's not just about the money," Caleb said, desperation creeping into his voice. "It's about survival. He's not some monster. He's refined, wealthy, safe. He said he'll take care of you. You'll live in luxury, Lena. No more stress. No more worrying about bills or groceries or keeping the lights on. You'll have everything. Everything except freedom, except choice, except my soul." I stared at him, trying to find the brother who used to read to me by flashlight during power outages, who once spent 3 nights in their chair when I had appendicitis, who swore he'd protect me from everything. But the man in front of me now looked like a shadow of that boy, crushed under the weight of regret and fear and hopelessness. And I hated him for what he was asking, but I also loved him too much to watch him drown. "When?" I asked, my voice brittle. He exhaled like I'd just pulled him from a cliff. "Tomorrow." A single word, and everything inside me shattered. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on my bed staring out at the rust-colored leaves that clung to the old maple tree in our yard, the same one Dad used to hang a tire swing from. My childhood felt so close I could taste it, and yet, it was already gone. In the mirror, I saw a girl I barely recognized, -24, untouched, invisible in most rooms. Always quiet, always polite, the one who never dated, never flirted, never kissed anyone. Not because I was saving myself, I just didn't know how to let anyone in, and now I would be giving myself to a stranger for a contract, for money, for a life I didn't choose. I didn't cry. I couldn't. Somewhere between anger and numbness, I packed a small bag and waited for dawn. The wedding was a blur of elegance and emptiness, a private ceremony in Lake Como, Italy, an estate carved into a hillside, marble steps leading down to shimmering waters. Everything looked like it belonged in a magazine. Everything felt like a lie. I wore a white dress I didn't pick, carried lilies I didn't ask for, and stood beside a man I didn't know while the priest pronounced us husband and wife. Dominic Vale was taller than I expected, sharp in a charcoal suit, his features sculpted and severe, all jawline, cool blue eyes, and posture like he ruled the earth. He didn't smile, he didn't blink much, but his gaze never left mine. It wasn't lustful or cruel, it was something colder, something more calculated, like he was memorizing me for a purpose. His voice when he said, "I do," was low and smooth like whiskey on ice. I said mine through frozen lips, barely hearing the applause that followed. At the reception, guests drank champagne and whispered admiration. "She's stunning," I overheard someone say. "So pure, so innocent, a perfect match for him," as if I were a rare collectible, a prized possession finally delivered. I barely touched my food. My stomach churned with every glance from Dominic, not leering, just steady, measuring, like he was waiting for something. As the sun dipped behind the hills and the candlelight flickered across the tablecloths, the air grew heavier, the music softer, the wine stronger, and I was drowning in it. I remember standing, trying to breathe, the scent of roses and lake mist spinning around me. I heard Caleb call my name, and then everything went black. I woke up wrapped in warmth I didn't recognize, silken sheets, a room that smelled of cedar and citrus, The bed beneath me softer than clouds, my dress was gone, replaced by a crisp white shirt, I realized when I caught the faint scent of expensive cologne on the collar. My heart slammed against my ribs as I sat up, only to see him standing by the window. Backlit by the morning sun. You fainted, Dominic said, turning toward me, his expression unreadable. The heat, or perhaps the nerves, his voice was calm, unbothered. Like this was all part of the plan. I clutched the shirt closer around me, my skin prickling under his gaze. What happened? I managed to say. Nothing, you didn't agree to, he replied coolly. Then, as if remembering manners, he added, you'll find breakfast waiting on the balcony, take your time. And then he left the room, leaving behind the echo of that single word that still rang in my ears. Wife? I wasn't free anymore. I belonged to him, and somewhere beneath the fear, buried deep in my chest, something else stirred, something warmer, something terrifying. The air on the balcony was cooler than I expected, carrying a soft breeze from the lake that tugged at the hem of the oversized shirt. I clutched tighter around me. Everything was glass and marble, sleek lines, elegant furnishings, and a kind of stillness that whispered money. A porcelain cup steamed with coffee. A spread of pastries, fruit, and fresh flowers waited like a scene out of a dream. But I wasn't hungry. I wasn't even sure I was awake. I stood frozen in place, the echo of that one word looping through my head like a haunting lullaby. Wife, wife, wife. And this was my husband's world. Dominic sat across from me, already dressed in a clean white shirt rolled at the sleeves, exposing forearms veined and strong. His tie was missing, his cuffs undone, as if he were trying to appear relaxed. But nothing about him was ever truly casual. His presence filled the space even when he didn't speak. He looked up when I approached, his eyes unreadable. Sit, he said simply, pulling out the chair beside him. I hesitated but obeyed, feeling the cold metal against my bare skin. He poured me coffee with surgical precision, adding a single cube of sugar without asking. As his fingers brushed mine while handing me the cup, a shiver danced up my spine. He noticed. You're quiet, he said, not unkindly. Is it fear? Or is it resentment? Does it matter? I asked, barely above a whisper. His gaze didn't flinch. It matters to me. I didn't know what to say to that. I sipped the coffee just to give my mouth something to do. It was perfect, rich, smooth, slightly bitter, just like him. You'll get used to this, he said after a moment, gesturing toward the view, the luxury, the silence, the freedom, the power. I'm not sure that's what this is, I replied, staring at the ripples on the water below. His lips twitched in the barest suggestion of a smile. No, I suppose not yet. That word again, not yet. The day passed in a fog of silence and stillness. I was shown around the estate by a soft-spoken woman named Rosalia who worked as the house manager. Every room looked like it belonged in a museum: velvet curtains, gilded edges, scents of lemon, wood, and old books. I wandered through the spaces like a ghost, my bare feet silent on the marble floors, my reflection watching me from every glinting surface, unfamiliar and hollow-eyed. When evening fell, Dominic appeared again, this time at the threshold of my door. We have a dinner tonight, he said, private, just us. I'm not hungry, you will be. I didn't argue, there was no use. I dressed in a gown that had been laid out on the bed, black silk, fitted, the neckline plunging deeper than I was comfortable with. No tag, no price. Just another thing already decided for me. He didn't say a word when he saw me walk into the dining room, but something shifted in his eyes, something tightened. He poured wine for both of us and pulled out my chair. The candles flickered, casting warm light over the polished mahogany and glinting off the edge of his watch. I could feel his gaze like it was hands, tracing every inch of my skin. Dinner was quiet. He asked no personal questions. I offered no conversation. But when dessert came, he leaned forward, his voice low and deliberate. You should know, he said. I don't expect anything from you tonight. I blinked. What? He studied me. I'm not interested in forcing you to perform your wifely duties. I've never found pleasure in power taken. I find it in power given. My throat tightened. So this isn't a transaction, he finished for me. Of course it is, but it doesn't have to stay that way. He stood then slowly and extended a hand. Come, walk with me. Against all sense, I placed my hand in his. We wandered through the garden, the paths lit by lanterns that swayed gently in the wind. The night was quiet, heavy with unsaid things. He didn't touch me, not once. But his nearness had weight. And when we stopped at the edge of the water and he looked at me, something in me braced. I want to be honest with you, Lena, he said softly. I didn't agree to this arrangement because I needed a wife. I agreed because I saw something in your file, a photograph, a few words your brother wrote, and I knew what? That I could give you everything, he said, except a choice. That's the part I regret. I turned away, my voice shaking. Then why did you still do it? Because I didn't expect to care. And then he left me there in the cold. with nothing but the sound of my heart hammering against my ribs. Later that night, I lay awake in the massive bed that didn't feel like mine. The sheets smelled like his cologne, the shadows crept like whispers across the walls. I stared at the ceiling for hours, trying to understand how a girl like me, quiet, unseen, untouched, had become the legal property of a man whose hands had yet to even touch me. And yet, somewhere in the silence, I remembered the way his voice softened when he said regret. I remembered the weight in his eyes when he admitted he hadn't expected to feel. And for a brief, dangerous moment, I wondered if the coldest hearts sometimes burned the hottest once they let go. I didn't know what the next day would bring, but I knew one thing. I had stopped being Lena, the sister, the invisible one. I had become someone new, someone who had to learn how to survive in a world of control, silence, and secrets. And if Dominic Vale thought I would simply exist quietly in his cage of gold, he had no idea who he had married. The next morning came softly. Like a sigh pressed between silk sheets and sunlight, I opened my eyes slowly. The ceiling above me still unfamiliar, but the scent was the same: cedar, citrus, and something deeper that reminded me of leather and silence. I sat up, the shirt I wore slipping slightly off my shoulder, and instinctively pulled it tighter. There was no sound in the penthouse, no footsteps, no voices. Just the quiet hum of the world Dominic Vale had built for himself, perfect, cold, and utterly controlled. I found him on the terrace, dressed in black slacks and a white linen shirt, sleeves rolled up, hands wrapped around a steaming cup of espresso. His back was to me, the morning breeze tugging gently at the edges of his shirt as he stared out at the lake. I stood there for a moment, watching the way the light danced off his shoulders, trying to make sense of what this man was: ice and fire, distance and gravity. He turned as if he felt me behind him. I ordered breakfast. He said simply, "I wasn't sure what you liked, so I ordered everything," and he had. The table was a quiet parade of pastries, berries, cheeses, eggs, smoked salmon, nothing too heavy. Everything elegant. I sat, wordless, trying not to shrink into myself. He poured my tea before I could touch the pot, always a step ahead, always. "Deliberate. You didn't sleep well," he said, not as a question. I shrugged. Strange bed. A pause. "Then, you'll get used to it," but I wasn't sure I wanted to. His eyes studied me over the rim of his cup, and I hated how aware I was of his presence, how his silence pressed into my skin like a secret waiting to be whispered. He didn't speak again until I stood to leave, and even then, his words were quiet, calculated. "I have meetings this afternoon. There's a library on the second floor. You might find something there to anchor you." Anchor me, as if I were already drifting. The library was as grand as I imagined: walls of books, dark wood, sunlight pouring through arched windows. I ran my fingers along the spines, finding familiar titles among the first editions: Austen, Eliot, Woolf, names I trusted, words I could lose myself in. I curled into a leather chair near the window and let time slide past me, page after page, trying to remember who I had been before my signature ended my freedom. Hours passed. I didn't hear him return. I only noticed when his voice came low from the doorway. "You look calm here," I startled, clutching the book to my chest. He stepped inside slowly, the sun hitting his features at a slant. He looked tired, less polished. A human crack in his diamond exterior. "Didn't mean to frighten you," he said. I shook my head. "You didn't hear you come in." He approached, stopping beside the chair but not sitting. "Do you mind if I ask you something personal?" I blinked. "I suppose you're entitled to ask anything now." He winced at that, and for the first time, I saw a flash of guilt behind those cool eyes. "You were untouched. I know your brother didn't tell you I requested that, but I did. I wanted someone who hadn't been shaped by others, not for purity, for clarity." I frowned. "Clarity? People who've been passed around come with performances," he said, almost sadly. "But someone untested, they're still there." "Own, I don't want to shape you, I just want to see you before the world dims the light." I didn't know what to say to that. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't even tender, but it was honest. "Why me?" I asked, the question finally tumbling out. "Why choose me out of 1,000 desperate girls who would have jumped into your bed for free?" He looked away for a long moment before answering. "Because you didn't want any of this." Silence fell heavy between us, but something shifted in it. Not softness, not yet, but curiosity. Later that evening, we dined again, this time in the conservatory. The air filled with candlelight and the distant sound of a cello playing from a speaker I couldn't see. He poured wine again. I noticed how he never ate much, just picked at his food while studying mine. I wondered if he ever really tasted anything. "I've made arrangements for us to visit Venice," he said, casually. "It's where I conduct most of my European acquisitions. You'll come with me." "You don't have to take me," I murmured. "I won't run." He leaned in slightly, his voice dipping into something darker. "I know you won't run." "That's not why I'm taking you." I met his gaze, heart stammering. "Then why?" His reply was slow, quiet, almost careful. Because you haunt me, Lena, and I want to know if the ghost disappears in daylight that night. I stood on the balcony alone, watching the stars spill across the water like broken pearls. My body was tired, my mind even more so, but I couldn't stop thinking about him, about his words, his hands. The way his silence sometimes felt louder than any scream when I turned to go back inside. I found him in the doorway. I couldn't sleep, he said. I nodded. Neither could I. He stepped closer, not touching, just near. His presence was heat. Would it scare you if I kissed you? He asked, voice low. I swallowed, yes. And if I promised I wouldn't take anything you weren't ready to give, my breath caught. Then I'd believe you. His hand rose slowly, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. His thumb lingered on my cheek, a feather-light touch that somehow burned. And then he leaned in, kissing me so gently I wasn't sure it had happened at all until he pulled back and looked at me like I was something rare, something he hadn't expected to need. Good night, Lena, he said, voice thick. Good night, Dominic. And for the first time, the name didn't sound like a sentence. It sounded like a key. The air in the Venice villa was heavy with the scent of old roses and polished stone. The floors echoed beneath my bare feet, even though I moved softly, like I was afraid to disturb something sacred. The rooms were quieter here, less sterile than the estate in Lake Como, but just as magnificent. Arched ceilings, faded frescoes on the walls, light pouring in through tall windows that opened out to the canal below. It was beautiful, it was unreal, and it was mine, at least on paper. Dominic had left earlier that morning for a meeting with his investors, and though the staff offered to draw me a bath or serve me breakfast in bed, I declined everything. I didn't want to be pampered. I wanted to breathe without someone watching. I wanted to remember what it felt like to simply exist. But that was the thing about being given everything, you never knew how to ask for the simple things again. I wandered into the courtyard, where marble statues stood half-bathed in sunlight and ivy curled around the pillars like lazy fingers. I sat on a bench and tilted my face to the warmth. For the first time in days, I let myself feel something that wasn't confusion or fear. I let the quiet settle. I let the strangeness of my life fill the space, and then I heard him. You like this garden? Dominic's voice was deep, calm, like the murmur of a river you didn't know you'd been floating down. I looked up. He stood in the archway, jacket off, sleeves rolled, his shirt slightly wrinkled like he'd spent the whole morning pacing. His tie was undone. I'd never seen him like that and guarded. It's the first place I've felt real since we left home, I admitted. His brow lifted slightly. Home? I paused. The house I grew up in, the one my brother gambled away. Dominic's jaw tensed, but he didn't flinch. He stepped closer. I know what you think of him, and of me, but I want you to know I didn't choose you because I thought you were weak. I chose you because I saw something quiet in you that hasn't been broken yet, and I'm not here to break it. I looked at him, uncertain of what I should say. There were too many things inside me, wounds and questions, and heat I didn't know how to name, so I said nothing. I just looked. He sat beside me, far enough not to touch, but close enough that the air changed. He rested his forearms on his knees and stared straight ahead. When I was 14, I watched my father burn down the only home we had just to collect insurance. My mother never left the bottle after that. You learn early in my world that everything can be bought: dignity, silence, survival, and love. I asked softly. He turned his head slowly, his gaze heavy. That's the one thing I've never been able to buy, and the only thing I've ever wanted. The words landed in me like stones in still water, rippling outward, changing the shape of everything. I didn't realize how close we were until his hand brushed mine. Not gripping, just there, an offering. He looked down at our fingers, barely touching. May I? It wasn't a demand, it wasn't a contract. It was a question. I nodded. His hand wrapped around mine, warm, steady, bigger than I expected, and my breath caught. Not because of fear, but because of what it awakened. I felt it, the flicker of desire, of something more dangerous than resentment or obligation. I felt seen. And for the first time since this whole twisted story began, I felt chosen. That night, I found him standing on the balcony of the master suite, the city glowing gold beneath a sky of deep indigo. He was drinking something dark, his tie gone again, the top buttons of his shirt undone. When he heard the soft click of my door, he didn't turn. I can't sleep, I whispered. Neither can I, he replied, still staring out at the water. I stepped beside him. He looked down at me finally, his eyes no longer cold, just tired and searching. You should go back to bed, he said. I don't want to be alone. He set down his glass. You won't be. And then he kissed me. Not hard, not fast. It was slow, exploratory, like a man trying to remember the shape of something he'd only ever dreamed about. His lips pressed to mine like they'd waited too long, like they weren't sure if they'd be allowed again. I leaned into it, letting my body follow my heart for once, and everything in me shivered awake when he pulled back. His forehead rested against mine. His breath was warm, ragged, Tell me when to stop. I couldn't speak. I didn't want to. I didn't want to stop. His hands found my waist, tentative but strong. He lifted me gently and sat me on the edge of the velvet chaise beside the windows. He knelt in front of me, his eyes on mine the whole time, like a man kneeling before something holy, and then his hands slid up my calves, under my dress, just enough to make my breath hitch. Breathe, he said softly. I'll only take what you give. His fingers moved in slow circles. Barely grazing the skin above my knees, my whole body responded, humming with a hunger I didn't know I had. Every inch he touched became a battlefield, fear and want crashing together in waves, but he never rushed, he never crossed a line. He just explored, teasing the edge of my restraint, waiting for me to pull him closer, and I did. I pulled him up to me, my fingers sliding into his shirt, feeling the heat of his chest beneath. He kissed my jaw, my throat, the hollow just below my ear. Every kiss was a key, unlocking something I didn't even know I'd buried. When he whispered my name, it didn't sound like ownership. It sounded like reverence. He didn't undress me that night. He didn't take what the contract said he could. Instead, he taught me how to feel again, with hands that didn't demand, with lips that asked permission, with a gaze that said, I see you, even if the rest of the world never has. And when I finally lay beside him, breathless and trembling with everything we hadn't done but everything we'd awakened, I knew I was still a virgin, still untouched in that final way. But I was no longer the girl my brother sold. I was becoming something else entirely. Something Dominic hadn't expected, something even I didn't understand yet. But whatever it was, it terrified me, because I knew this wasn't just a marriage anymore. It was the beginning of a war between the girl I used to be and the woman he was pulling me into becoming. Venice lingered behind us like a perfume on silk, soft, haunting, impossible to forget. We returned to Lake Como under a pale sky that seemed too quiet for the changes stirring inside me. I sat beside Dominic in the back of the black car, the space between us charged with the memory of his hands on my skin, his breath in my ear, and the promise of more that we hadn't yet spoken aloud. He didn't try to touch me on the drive back, but I could feel him watching when I pretended to sleep. The heat of his gaze grazing my skin like sunlight through clouds. That night, I found him in his study, an enormous room that smelled like tobacco and old books. He sat behind a walnut desk, sleeves rolled, his tie discarded beside a crystal decanter. The shadows from the fireplace danced across his face, and for a moment, I saw something in his expression that made my pulse stutter. Regret. You work late, I said from the doorway. He didn't look up right away. Some habits are harder to break than others. I stepped inside. And what are you working on now? Another acquisition, another empire? No, he finally met my gaze. I'm trying to unlearn how to be alone. I moved closer, unsure why my feet were responding faster than my caution. Was there ever a time you weren't? His fingers tightened around his glass. Yes, once. He didn't offer more, and I didn't ask, but I knew there was a name buried in the pause, a wound he didn't dare touch. He stood slowly and poured a second glass of wine, offering it without a word. I took it, and for a long moment we stood there, just breathing in the same space, just existing without needing to fix the silence. Then I asked the question I hadn't been brave enough to ask until now. Who was she? He didn't pretend not to know what I meant. Her name was Elise, he said finally. She was the first person who ever saw me beyond the money, beyond the name. She made me laugh. She made me weak. What happened? She died, he replied, and it was the kind of sentence that didn't need an explanation. The weight of it told me everything. I set my glass down. You still love her? No, he said immediately, then softer. I remember her, but love, that's a different kind of ghost. I should have left. I should have given him space to grieve, to hide, but instead, I stepped into his shadow and placed my hand against his chest. I'm not her, I know, he whispered, voice strained. That's why I'm afraid. His hands found my waist, not hungry, not demanding, just there, grounding me. He pulled me close until our foreheads touched, until the space between inhale and exhale was shared. And then he kissed me, and it wasn't about desire or dominance. It was about grief and gratitude, about memory, and maybe, just maybe, about beginning again. We didn't make love that night. We didn't even undress. But he held me as if the world outside could shatter and only this moment would survive. The next morning, things changed. Subtle shifts in gravity. I noticed how he started waiting for me before breakfast. How he asked me what books I liked, what music I listened to. How he touched me not just when the world was watching, but when no one else could see. A hand at the small of my back, a palm brushing mine as we passed each other in the hallway. And I changed too. I found myself speaking more, laughing at his rare but dry jokes, leaving my door open just a little at night. One afternoon, I walked into his private wing, a place I'd never dared before, and found a room filled with canvases, dozens of them, some half-painted, some still blank. At the center stood a single portrait, A woman in white, her eyes were wild with laughter, her hands were unfinished. Is this her? I asked, breath catching. He nodded, stepping beside me. I never finished it, couldn't. I turned to him. You should. He looked at me then, and for the first time, his gaze didn't pull me under, it wrapped around me. I don't want to finish her anymore, he said. I think I want to start something new. He reached for a clean canvas, then he handed me a brush. My hands trembled as I dipped it in the paint. I don't know how, I confessed. You don't have to, he said gently. You just have to begin, and we painted together in silence. Brush strokes tentative at first, then braver, messier, and somewhere between the lines. Between the laughter that escaped when I smeared white across his shirt and the look in his eyes. As he wiped color from my cheek, I realized something. We were building something that didn't belong to the contract. It didn't belong to the past or the pain or the debts that started this all. We were building us. And for the first time since I said I do, I wanted to say it again, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The sound of the lake lapping against the stone terrace had become something like a lullaby to me. In the mornings, I would sit wrapped in one of Dominic's linen shirts, watching the sun stretch across the hills, and in the evenings, I would listen to the stillness of him breathing beside me. His fingers sometimes unconsciously tangled in mine. Peace had never felt like a real thing before. It had always been something I saw through windows or read about in books, quiet, golden, and belonging to someone else. But in those days, it started to feel like it could belong to me. Then came the knock. 3 quick raps at the front door, sharp and confident. The kind of knock that doesn't ask for permission, it demands it. I was in the study, curled on the couch with a novel, when Rosalia came to find me. Her face tight with hesitation. There's someone here, she said. He claims to be your brother. Time stopped. My heart, too, Caleb. I followed her to the foyer in silence, my body stiff with memories I hadn't planned to revisit. And there he was, worn leather jacket, eyes frantic. The same tired smirk he always wore when he needed something. He looked thinner, paler. Like regret had eaten away at whatever pride he used to carry, but he was still Caleb. Still the boy who read me bedtime stories. Still the man who sold me for a number with too many zeros. Lena, he said, like it hadn't been months, like nothing had happened. What are you doing here? I asked, my voice sharper than I expected. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words never landed because behind me, Dominic's voice came low and lethal from the top of the stairs. Why is he here? I turned. Dominic stood like a shadow. Sleeves rolled to his elbows, shirt half-buttoned. His eyes locked on Caleb with a look I hadn't seen before, cold, possessive, dangerous. He just showed up, I said. Dominic descended slowly, his steps echoing. You think you can come here and what? Apologize? Ask for more? Caleb straightened his spine, defensiveness flashing. You think I wanted to sell my sister? You think I sleep easy knowing what I did? You slept easy enough when you cashed the check, Dominic replied, his voice ice. I didn't come for money, Caleb said quickly, looking to me. I came for her. That's when Dominic stopped walking. The room went still. For her? He repeated slowly. Caleb stepped toward me. Lena, I made a mistake, I know that. But you don't belong in this world. You don't belong with him. Come home. We can figure this out together. Home, as if that still existed. As if he hadn't burned it down with a signature and a lie. I'm already home, I said quietly. Caleb looked at me like he didn't understand the language I was speaking. This isn't you, he whispered. You don't wear diamonds. You don't sip champagne on terraces. You're not his wife. You're just a girl he bought. The silence that followed was brutal. Dominic moved closer, calm but seething. You're right, he said. She was a girl I bought, but now she's a woman who owns me in every way that matters. I reached for Dominic's hand without even thinking. He took it. You need to leave, I told Caleb, softly but firmly. Whatever we had, whatever you were to me, you sold it the day you handed me over. You don't get to take it back. Caleb's face fell, as if he'd finally realized this wasn't just a transaction anymore. It was transformation, and I was no longer someone he could guilt, or manipulate, or save. Dominic waited until he was gone before he spoke again. I'm sorry you had to see him, he said. I would have thrown him out myself if I thought he'd ever touch you again. He already did. I whispered, but you're the one who taught me how to heal. Dominic turned to me, his expression softening. And you taught me how to feel again. That night, he didn't touch me out of hunger. He touched me out of fury, softened by love. His kisses were fierce, but not punishing. His hands gripped me like I was a lifeline, not a possession. And when he whispered my name against my skin, it was an apology stitched into every syllable. We didn't speak of Caleb again, not because we were pretending, but because the chapter had closed. Whatever we were building, this fragile, fiery thing, it had been tested, and it had survived. The night after Caleb left, the silence in the villa felt different. It wasn't empty, it wasn't cold. It was charged alive with things unspoken and things finally understood. I sat on the edge of the bed, brushing my fingers lightly over the fabric of the silk nightdress Rosalia had laid out for me. Pale, ivory, thin straps, soft as water against my skin. I had never worn anything like it before. I had never wanted to, but that night I did. I didn't hear Dominic enter the room, but I felt him. The way the air shifted, the way my skin prickled in awareness before he said a word. I turned to find him standing in the doorway, shirt unbuttoned, his hair slightly tousled. His jaw sharp in the amber light from the hallway behind him, his eyes landed on me and they didn't leave. I thought you'd be asleep, he said, voice low and rough. I couldn't, I replied, there's too much in my head. Tell me, he said. I stood slowly, bare feet on cold marble, my heart thrumming with something fierce and terrified. I walked toward him until I was close enough to smell the faint citrus and heat of his skin. I don't want to think anymore, I whispered. I just want to feel. He didn't move. I want to give it to you, I said, trembling. Not because you paid, not because you expect it, but because I need to, because I want to. His breath caught and he stepped forward, lifting one hand to cup my cheek as if I might break under his touch. Are you sure? I nodded, my voice steady now. I'm yours, Dominic, all of me. He kissed me then, and it was like nothing before. There was no hesitation, no gentle patience. This time it was need-hungry and whole. His lips claimed mine with heat, his hand sliding over my hips, my back, pulling me flush against him until every inch of us was touching. I gasped into his mouth as he lifted me easily, carrying me across the room until my back met the wall. His hands roamed down my thighs, slipping beneath the silk to lift it higher, and I wrapped my legs around his waist without thinking. You drive me mad, he growled against my neck, his mouth hot and relentless. Then take me, I whispered. All the way. He carried me to the bed and laid me down like something precious, though there was nothing delicate about the way we looked at each other. I pulled the nightdress over my head and let it fall. For the first time, I was bare before him and I wasn't ashamed. His eyes darkened as he undressed, and when he climbed onto the bed, his body hovered over mine like a question. Still sure? He murmured, his lips ghosting over my shoulder more than anything. His hand slid slowly between my thighs, fingers tracing the places he'd once teased but never fully taken. My body arched under him, aching and slick with anticipation. When he finally entered me, he did it slowly, carefully, but he didn't hold back. I gasped, tears stinging my eyes, not from pain, but from the overwhelming, aching fullness of it all. His body moved against mine, and it felt like surrender, like resurrection. Every thrust, every moan, every whispered name was a vow. I clung to him, nails digging into his back, as pleasure bloomed into something I'd never known my body could hold. When I cried out his name, he silenced me with his mouth, swallowing my voice like a prayer. And when we collapsed together in the afterglow, tangled and trembling, his hand found mine under the sheets and laced our fingers. I've had everything in this world, he whispered into my hair, his chest still rising and falling against my back. But you're the only thing I've ever truly wanted. I turned my face to his and kissed him again, slow and deep, the way people do when they've stopped pretending. We didn't sleep right away. His hands kept returning to me and mine to him, as if we were afraid to forget the feeling. And when we finally did sleep, it was the kind that comes after battle, exhausted, raw, and completely at peace. In the morning, I woke up with sunlight on my bare skin and his arm heavy across my waist. I turned to face him, and he was already watching me. I want you like this every morning, he murmured, soft, undone, and mine. I smiled, not because I belonged to him, but because he finally belonged to me. And for the first time, what we had wasn't about survival, or escape, or debt. It was love, true, fierce, and finally free. The days that followed were unlike anything I had ever known. They weren't made of diamonds or private jets or candlelit dinners, though those things came and went like shadows. They were made of mornings where Dominic kissed my shoulder before I opened my eyes, of afternoons spent wandering through sun-drenched corridors barefoot, our laughter echoing like something sacred. We weren't playing pretend anymore. We weren't bound by papers or silence. We were becoming something real. It started in the smallest ways. He began asking my opinions, not just out of politeness, but with genuine interest. What I thought of the books he read, the art he collected, the cities he was scouting for his next expansion. He listened, really listened. His gaze locked on me like I was saying something that mattered, and for the first time, I felt like I did. He took me to a private gallery one evening, just the two of us. The curator bowed and left us alone, the security detail outside the doors. Room after room of paintings, some dark and brooding, others exploding with color. But there was one wall left bare. I'm saving that space, Dominic said quietly, his hand on the small of my back. For what? For something I haven't found yet. I turned to him. Or someone. He didn't answer, but the next morning, I found a canvas and a brush waiting in the library. No note, no instruction, just a gift. That's how it began. He gave me space, and I filled it. I started to paint badly, messily, joyfully. The room that had once held only his past now bloomed with strokes of my present. When he came in and saw my first finished piece, a soft swirl of blues and golds, he didn't speak. He just stood behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. I'll have it framed. He whispered against my hair and hung on the wall I saved. We built a garden next, or rather, I did, and he let me. I dug my hands into the earth. Like I was searching for pieces of myself. He sat nearby most days, watching, reading, sometimes bringing me lemonade like we were something impossibly domestic. He teased me when I smeared dirt across my cheek. I teased him when he tried to plant something and killed it in under 24 hours. At night, we still burned. But there was more now. He didn't just touch my body, he held my thoughts, my fears, my dreams. One evening, wrapped in a blanket on the balcony, he asked what I would have done with my life if things had been different. I wanted to write. I said, children's books, quiet stories with big hearts. He leaned in and kissed my temple. Then write, I'll build the world around you. And he did. He gave me a corner of the estate, renovated it into a tiny studio with white walls, big windows, and a desk that faced the hills. He stocked it with notebooks, pencils, a coffee machine that brewed exactly how I liked it. I cried when I saw it, ugly, unfiltered tears, and he didn't laugh or try to fix it. He just held me. This is what you do, I whispered into his chest. You take what's broken and you build cathedrals out of it. No, he murmured. You were never broken, you were just waiting to be seen. We traveled to Florence, to Santorini, to Marrakesh, and yet, every time we returned home, it felt like we were coming back to something sacred. Our life wasn't a vacation anymore. It was a rhythm: morning tea, afternoon walks, midnight touches that grew softer even as the hunger never left us. One night, over dinner, he said, I never planned to fall in love. I didn't reply. I just reached across the table and held his hand, because I knew. So did I. The past still crept in sometimes. I'd wake up from dreams where I was back in that tiny house, where Caleb's voice echoed down hallways I couldn't escape. But Dominic was always there, his hand on my spine, his voice in the dark. You're safe now. He'd whisper, you're not hers, you're not his, you're not a debt, you're mine. And when he said mine now, it didn't feel like a claim, it felt like a promise. We were learning each other slowly, deeper than skin. I learned he hummed when he was focused, that he hated strawberries, that he read poetry but would die before admitting it. He learned I cried during documentaries and always slept on the left side of the bed. We were building something neither of us had dared imagine, not a marriage, not a mansion, but a home. Summer ended quietly in Lake Como. The leaves shifted from green to gold and the sky wore a softer shade of blue. Life with Dominic had fallen into a kind of sacred rhythm, steady, quiet, rare. We were no longer two people orbiting a contract. We were gravity itself, pulling closer without resistance. But nothing stays untouched forever. Even love. It began with a letter. I found it tucked inside a stack of documents on Dominic's desk. I wasn't snooping. I was leaving him a note, just a line about dinner, about wine and stargazing, but the envelope had my name on it, handwritten. Familiar. Caleb. I stared at it for a long moment, the ink burning against the ivory paper like a brand I thought I'd outgrown. My fingers shook as I opened it, but I read every word. He was in Paris, working, sober, saying he was sorry again, that he'd gone to therapy, that he saw now what he did to me, that he'd give back every cent, even if it took a lifetime, that if I ever wanted to talk, he'd be waiting. I didn't realize Dominic was standing behind me until his voice cracked the silence. I was going to tell you, I just didn't want to bring him back into your life without your choice. I turned slowly, the letter still in my hand. You knew he sent this? He nodded. He found a way to reach my office through an old contact, said he didn't expect anything, just wanted to say it to you. I sat down. My knees didn't feel steady. Dominic moved to kneel in front of me, hands on my thighs, eyes locked on mine. You don't owe me anything, or him, or anyone. You can write him back, you can walk away. You can take time, whatever you need. This isn't about what was, it's about what you want now. That was the moment everything tilted, because he wasn't just releasing me from the shadows of my past, he was giving me power over my present. And I didn't know what to do with it. That night, I walked the grounds of the estate alone. The garden I'd built with my own hands, now full of late summer color. I watched the wind move through the flowers and thought about all the versions of myself I'd shed in the last year. The girl who was sold, the woman who surrendered, the wife who bloomed. Was there still a place for the sister who had loved blindly? I wrote back to Caleb the next morning, 1 page, no accusations, no promises, just closure. I forgave him not for his sake, but for mine. When I gave Dominic the letter and asked him to have it sent, he didn't even read it. He simply nodded. Are you okay? He asked. I think I'm more than okay, I said. I think I'm finally whole. His arms wrapped around me so tightly I felt like he was anchoring me to the earth. Then let's start everything from the beginning, he whispered. No contracts, no debt. Just you and me. He pulled a small black box from his pocket and opened it. Inside wasn't a diamond. It was a gold band, simple and perfect for the real marriage, he said. If you'll say yes this time by choice. Tears filled my eyes. But I didn't need to think. Yes, I whispered, to every life we didn't know we were waiting for. He kissed me with reverence. And when we made love that night, it felt like a beginning, not of ownership, not of surrender, but of something so equal, so sacred. It erased everything before it. The morning light crept slowly through the linen curtains, soft and golden, casting long shadows across the sheets. I lay still, listening to the quiet hum of the lake outside and the steady heartbeat beneath my cheek. Dominic's arm was draped around me, his hand resting protectively over my ribs. Fingers curled in his sleep like he was still holding me even in dreams. The warmth of his body was my shelter now, not his wealth, not his name, just him. I opened my eyes to a world I finally belonged in. The silk sheets no longer felt foreign. The air didn't carry the weight of performance. This bed, once the symbol of a contract, had become the place where I learned how to breathe, how to trust, how to love. Dominic stirred beneath me, blinking slowly, a lazy smile tugging at the corners of his mouth as he looked down. Good morning, wife, he said, voice rough with sleep and affection. I smiled, pressing a kiss to his chest. Good morning, husband. He shifted, brushing my hair from my face with the back of his hand, his eyes searching mine the way they always did, like he was still surprised I was real. You're different now, he whispered. I am, stronger and softer. I said, you made me both. He exhaled and pulled me tighter. No, you were always that. I just got lucky enough to see it. We lay in silence for a while, not because there was nothing to say, but because some mornings don't require words. They're made of glances, of slow breaths, of the way your hand fits into someone else's without thought. Later, we made breakfast together. It was messy and perfect. He burned the toast. I spilled orange juice on the floor. He kissed me over the counter with flour on his nose, and I laughed, a sound that once lived in shadows, now blooming effortlessly between us. We took our coffee to the terrace, the lake glittering beneath a sky the color of promise. I sat on his lap, legs curled beneath me, and he read the paper aloud in a terrible French accent just to make me smile. The world, with all its chaos, couldn't touch us here. That evening, we hosted our closest friends, people who had grown to know me not as Dominic Vale's wife, but as Lena, the woman who painted wildflowers and told stories with her eyes. I wore a soft blue dress he'd gifted me the week before, not because it was designer, but because he said the color reminded him of how my soul looked when I was happy. He toasted me in front of them all, to the woman who was never meant to be bought, but who gave herself freely and changed everything, he said, lifting his glass. I looked at him, eyes stinging, heart aching in the best way. And that night, after the house had quieted, after the wine glasses had been cleared and the music faded, I stood at the same bedroom window where I had once wondered if I was a prisoner. Now, I was free. He came up behind me, arm sliding around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder. What are you thinking? He asked. I turned to him, kissed him softly, and said the only thing that mattered. I woke up here once in your shirt, terrified and alone, but now I wake up as yours. Not because you claimed me, but because I claimed myself, and because you loved me the way no one else ever did, without force, without shame, just fully. He looked at me with that quiet intensity that once scared me, now made me feel safe. You were never mine to own, you were only ever mine to protect. I nodded, my chest tight with emotion. And now you're mine too. We made love slowly that night, not as strangers, not even as lovers, but as to people who had built a world from ash and silver. Every touch was a memory, every kiss was a vow, and when we finally lay still, bodies tangled, hearts steady, he whispered in my ear, forever, and I whispered back, until the stars burn out. And that was the morning I woke up, not as the girl who had been sold, not as a debt, not as a transaction, but as a woman loved, chosen, and whole. And this time, I wasn't waking up afraid, I was waking up home.